So, I mean, this is actually an AA Long argument that he showed me, that just because something is a fact doesn't mean I should do something about it. It depends on, in part, the consequences of the fact. It depends on, in part, in my role, right? So I would say, like, do I have a role? I mean, not me personally, because I have a bigger role because of the nature of my job, but do I have a role to say not throw litter in the street? Yes. Like, do I have a role to perhaps not have as many long haul flights if I know, or someone who knows this stuff and I trust them says, every time you get on a flight from Australia to California, every time you do that, you're going to take off, a few meters of ice. And then I go, okay, is that bad? And then you ask the question, is it bad? And you deliberate. So you'd say, how many people are on this planet? Okay, there's 7 billion. Most of them live where? The coast. Right, what happens if the ice melts and most of our population, like 80, it's like 80% of the population live within a very small part.
For Australia, it's everybody. We're all gone.
Everybody, yeah. You go, okay, who lives on the coast? Okay, what would happen if the ice melts? They would drown. Isn't that bad? Do I value human life? Like, you start to do that. Okay, what happens if I just moved everyone to the mountains? Where would they grow their crops? I've just drowned all their crops. Then they would starve. Is starving people bad? Like, you have to actually go through, like, reasonably, like, every single, like, basic, I would say very basic argument, because, like, people said to me, yeah, but this world is not as hot as it used to be. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. No scientist is claiming it's the hottest it's ever been, right? The problem is that when it was really hot, we didn't have 7 billion people on the planet. So if we only had, let's imagine we had 1 million, like, people and 1 million, let's say Homo sapiens and 300,000 Neanderthals, right? Okay, we can probably be a bit more flexible, because, we can work out, let's say we had the same technology, we could probably have some greenhouses, and it's only 300,000 Neanderthals you have to look after and 1 million Homo sapiens, brilliant. And we could do that because we have a very different situation. So I say to people all the time, okay, that's true. It's not the hottest it's ever been. Which 3 billion of people do you want to kill? Which ones do we value the least? And that also gets this, like, very shocked reaction. But it's true. Basically, if you're saying I value more my 4x4 and I value more my flights, I'm basically making a statement that those people were very vulnerable and unable to move, because they're assuming that because they're Australian or because they're British, they would just move. You think people in Bangladesh can just move? And you go, okay, so let's imagine a place where they all move. Like, let's say Mexicans don't really like being hot, and because of the climate change issue, and they move to America. What could possibly go wrong? And then you start to be like, this is a massive problem. If this mass movement, I'm not saying it is climate change, I gave that example, I don't think it is at the moment, but it will be if we continue this trajectory. So you start to ask yourself these questions and say, if I value other people's life, what should I do? If I value justice, is it fair that I get a greater share of resources and they can't even eat? I would say that's a lack of justice. And you say, perhaps it's even lack of self-control. Like, no, I need my 3 steaks. I need it. It's really good for my iron content. And you say, well, what about if you just eat vegetables? You can also get iron from vegetables. And you say, okay, then maybe there's a mechanism of self-control here, because greed is never good. Lack of self-control, and injustice obviously is a vice. So if you can reason with me, if someone who says to me, no, I disagree with you, Kai, climate change is good for the planet, I'm from Greenland, it's going to be brilliant, and actually Greenland is probably going to be better off, then I'd say, okay, do we only live in Greenland? No. Okay, so you'd have to reason with me as to why the other 7.9 billion people can, the rest of them can die, and the small population of Greenland can be better off. Which sounds very utilitarian, and in the sense that it is, because you're actually saying, okay, what am I valuing here? So climate change is a fact, and then how you cash that in virtue depends on all these circumstances. So it's that context, depends on who you are, what you know, and you have a duty to gain knowledge. Gain information, and then convert that information into knowledge, which then becomes wisdom when it's literally embedded in you, and you actually walk it out. So then you say, okay, if I have an obligation to inform myself either by reading or by asking Will, then whether based on, I know that they do the reading for me, which is fine, can't read everything, then basically I need to make a decision based on the facts they presented and the reasons behind the facts themselves. This is why Becca and I really like Becca's work, in the sense that he made a really huge effort and did some really interesting things. The facts themselves don't tell you what to do. So if I live according to facts, okay, climate change means climate is warming, and there's no reason just based on a fact that I should do something. Because you can't derive, it's David Hume argument, you can't derive values from facts. In Stoicism, you don't have to, because you have the logos as the objective yardstick. I mean, it's more than that, but you can use it as an objective yardstick. So I don't have this fact value distinction that I do if I use Becker's approach. I don't know, Will, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, jump in, Will.
Wow, there's a lot in this question. I also am a fan of Becker's work. I like the attempt to reorient, let's say, these terms into a really contemporary context. Social theory in particular has been very interested in the idea of whether value and fact can be commensurate. I discuss in one of my chapters a social theorist called Max Weber, who says science can tell us what we can do, but not what we should do. Now, this is a contentious argument, but nevertheless, it's relevant here. I think in terms of my own inquiries into the climate question with Stoicism, firstly, yeah, Kai's work is quite inspirational in that regard, as is William Stevens. But in the particular chapter that I wrote on the environmental question, I did find myself really inspired by one of Kai's co-written pieces, actually, with Leonidas Konstantakis. And from that, you find these symmetries, I suppose, globally, of people who are interested in the application of Stoicism to environmentalism and questions of sustainability, without it just being how can we save the planet kind of discussions, but rather, what does it mean to be impelled to save the planet? Why do we want to save the planet? Why should we save the planet? Why should we save ourselves? So in the chapter that I wrote on this, I looked at the fact that primarily the Stoics were interested in this principle of change underpinning the universe. So Marcus Aurelius, for instance, says it would be rational to be upset by the fact that the physical world changes. So from that, then I ask, if the Stoics are so emphatic about change and they say we should accept change, does that mean that a changing climate would also be harmless? Should we just accept that? Now, of course, within Stoicism, you need to consider the causes behind things. And in climate changes, particular, in the example of climate change, we'd have to consider whether causes which underpin climate change are rational. So I would suggest that to determine whether the causes of climate change are rational, we need to ask whether they cohere with the whole order of things, as many of the Stoics would say. And let's just say, for argument's sake, I'm not pushing any particular line down anyone's throat, but let's just say you believed that the decisions and processes involved in industrialization were involved in the causes of climate change. So my perspective would be that if you were to determine whether they were rational from a Stoic perspective, you wouldn't just look at the effects or the climatic effects. You wouldn't just look at pollution. You wouldn't just look at sea levels, et cetera, et cetera. Rather, your responsibility from a Stoic regard, firstly, would be to ask whether those decisions and those actions appreciated their interconnection with everything else in the universe. And that might sound abstract and vague in one regard, but in another regard it doesn't, because it takes the localized industrial setting out of that exclusive geography and asks, what are the ramifications of those actions, those decisions for surrounding environments and so on. So I think the question of climate change and Stoicism is going to be contentious because people already come to it with their particular investments. And in that regard, and they'll also question the statistics around climate change, whether the sea levels are actually rising, whether the pollution is actually as bad. And so one way I think we can skirt around those aspects of the climate question, which are not necessarily agreed upon, is from a Stoic perspective instead to ask, do these decisions and actions appreciate global or universal interconnection? Now, if they don't, then they're irrational. And then climate change would not be a physical change that we would consider to be rational and part of the whole order of things.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make
Okay.
sense?
I think I'm grasping what you're saying, but can something that exists within the cosmos be outside of what we think of as rational, right? Because it's like the logos, or the cosmos is a well-ordered whole. And I guess going back to what I probably didn't portray in the best light, but what I'm trying to say about what I think of the situation is, so we start with the idea that the Stoics taught, that we are not separate from nature, we are not separate from this world in any way, we are a part of the whole. Like, so we have the cosmos, and we're in the cosmos, you can't take us out of it, therefore we are part of it. And God is this, like, going back to pantheism, is like God is flowing through everything, it's flowing through me, it's flowing through you. So we can even look at it as friendship. I don't treat you in a poor way because you are me, because we're both made from the same thing and we're both part of the same cosmos. In the same way, I don't throw litter on the street because that street is me. Like, the environment that I live in, the environment that I am from and go back to, is not separate from me, it is me. And that not only does things to my mind, this idea that I would allow myself to throw litter on the street, but it has those effects that ripple throughout culture, right? Somebody sees me do that, they might do that. And it's like, in the same way that you wouldn't trash your body day after day after day with crappy food and just become an absolute monster, like you wouldn't do that with the world because it is you. Do you know what I mean?
I do. That's a very monistic way of looking at it. A very monistic way of looking at it. I like that reading of Stoicism. As I said at the outset, that's what it appealed to me, was its physical simplicity, if you like.
Yeah, Kai, I think you wanted to jump in as well.
I got to jump in with there is an extent where we don't go as far as deep ecology. So the idea that I can become a tree, I just want to clarify, if anybody, I'm not saying you're saying that, but there's people go, so therefore you Stoics think that we can become trees because no, it's that we are anthropocentric because the only perspective we can take is the one human one, but we're equally logocentric. So we are not biocentric. We don't think that we can become trees or squirrels we're inherently human, but we share the logos. So our role is different. So though we can see the essence of the logos in the tree and therefore the essence of the logos in us, we can't become a tree or see the tree from the tree's perspective. But I just had to clarify because otherwise people are going to be like, I also think this is a Chris Gill argument, actually. Christopher Gill said that nature has providential care, and if our actions diminish the providential care that nature can provide, we actually have to step up. So I thought that was really interesting, that if by doing these irrational actions, so basically like the irrational action becomes, as Will just said, am I affecting nature's ability to provide providential care to myself, others, and the wider Earth's community? Yes. Therefore, any actions that I do on purpose that would render this providential care, in a way that is more limited or even absent, would be bad. Like, it would be actually vicious. And I have a duty as a human being to recognize that it's logocentric, that we have this shared logos, and that I have this higher level of rationality in the sense that I can collaborate with my own species better than other species can collaborate with their species. I'm not saying that no animals are rational. I'm just saying our rationality enables us to collaborate in a way that no other species can, which has caused this climate change effect because of the cumulative effect. And therefore, we have to use the same understanding, like being pro-social, the same essence of fragment that's in us, to then come to the solution. We need to use the same mechanism. Sorry.